I'd like to invite Rabbi Stewart Weiss to answer our question, or his question. Esther, comma, prisoner or princess? Or princess or prisoner? Not sure which. He'll tell us. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. Glad to see that you've come out and we kept the rain away, so hopefully you'll come out dry as well, but maybe with a little bit more knowledge. So we've done now, I think this is our fourth time together, the three rabbis, and hopefully we'll do something perhaps for Pesach and offer some insights there. I want to just ask everybody to kind of hold off on any comments or questions. Maybe we have one or two at the end. If not, we'll try to have a little time for questions and answers. I'm going to present some things that may surprise you a bit, but everything I think is using traditional sources. So Purim is, of course, a fantastically wild, happy holiday. Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim B'Simcha. We're all in wars aside. We're all in a very festive mood. It's a raucous and kind of wild to abandon festival. When I was a kid, it was great being told by my teachers that you can go to shul and make a lot of noise, yell out things against Haman, bring whatever inventive ways you have of the traditional Gregor or a boat horn or whatever you can to make as much noise as possible. We drink, we feast, we really live it up. We have these wild costume parties. It's really kind of breaks the mold of the usual Jewish holidays. But it's very, very fascinating and quite perplexing. Let's say, sometimes if you want a thrill, you go to Bnei Brak and you see all the kids in costumes, especially the little girls in Esther costumes, dressed up as the princess. But just imagine for a moment if you went, not on Purim, but you came to Bnei Brak and you were proclaiming great news. There's a nice Jewish girl and she married an anti-Semitic non-Jew. Let's all celebrate. How exactly would this play in Mea Shearim and Bnei Brak? But this is exactly what Purim is all about, if you think about it. We are maybe kind of naive, or perhaps we just don't see the overall picture of Esther, a Jewess married to Acheshvarosh, and this is something that we're celebrating, and this is a happy ending. This is what I want to try to examine tonight. Esther is committing, first of all, we're talking about a very prominent religious family. Mordechai is a member of the Sanhedrin. Mordechai is one of the great tzaddikim, the Hasidic leader, if you will, of the community. And how does he accept such a proposition? By all rights, Esther should really, if she does anything at all, it should be to commit suicide, because the Torah tells us that we all know of the three cardinal sins, which are Yarov al Yavor. You must die rather than transgress those sins. Avodah Zarah, idolatry, Shvichat Damim, murder. You have to die before you murder somebody else, even if you're ordered to do so, even at the cost of your own life. And Gilu Arayot, and committing certain extreme sexual sins such as incest. And there is a fourth. Most people only know those three, but the Torah tells us there is a fourth sin for which you must give up your life rather than transgress. and that is the sin of Chilul Hashem. When you commit any sin that tarnishes, that disgraces, that really undermines the image of God, you have to die rather than transgress. So is Esther not guilty of exactly this? Why is she not, either on her own volition or by Mordecai's order, why is she continuing and not following through and killing herself? And the rabbis are very mystified by this. They grapple with this question, and they give three answers. First, they say, although it is public knowledge that Esther and Acheshvarosh are married, nevertheless, one of the conditions for Chilul Hashem is that it has to be specifically targeted against or in a Jewish sense. In other words, it has to be something which defames Judaism and thus brings dishonor to God. Well, Esther does not reveal who she is, so it cannot reflect negatively on Judaism because people don't know that she's Jewish. So that's one of the answers. It's not a slur because, and it may even be one of the reasons why Mordecai said, do not reveal who you are, because once you do, then you are indeed engaging in Chilul Hashem and you'll have to give up your life. A second reason given, and none of these are simple, and that is this famous phrase of Esther Karka Olam Haita. Says the Gemara, it is true, she is having relations with someone, a nice Jewish girl with a not very nice Jewish man, a non-Jewish man, but she is taking no pleasure or enjoyment out of it. And that's the phrase which the Gemara uses. She is Karka Olam. She is, as let us say, emotionless or non-turned on as mud or dirt would be. She gets no sexual fulfillment from it, and therefore it's not as bad as it would be if she willfully, happily engaged in this relationship. And the third reason which Chazal give, and this is one of the most difficult ideas, and that is the concept of Avera Lishma, a sin which is done for the right reason. Sometimes this is known as mitzvah haba ba'avera, a mitzvah that results from doing a sin. It's a very slippery slope. I don't suggest anyone try it at home, but this idea of doing something which clearly is a sin, but because it has a good purpose behind it, that you are taking the chance and hoping that God will not be upset. At the end of the day, I did something that was beneficial. And the Gemara uses the example for mitzvah haba ba'avera or avera lishma of Yael. Do you remember the story of Yael? In the battle of Devorah and Barak against Sisera at Har Tavor, one of the heroines of the whole story is Yael. She is the one who, okay, we'll wait a second until you get it right. Thank you. Yael is the one who, in order to assist the Jewish forces, she convinces, doesn't take much convincing, Sisera to come into her tent. She seduces him, and ultimately she gives him things to eat and drink that causes him to fall asleep. And then she puts a 10-pin into his temple, and his head is paraded, which obviously is very disconcerting and demoralizing to the army, to his army. The Gemara says that Sisera was a very virile individual. He had relations with her 7 times. And yet, says the Gemara, whatever she did because she wanted to help, not for her own satisfaction, but she wanted to help the Jewish forces prevail. And they, in a sense, give her a kind of pass. And even Yael is made into a kind of model figure for someone who does whatever it takes to advance the cause of Am Yisrael. And as we know, it's a very popular name. We often can judge who's good, who's not good by the use of names, although sometimes today you find some very strange names that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. But generally speaking, we learn something about individuals. We might have thought that there was something not quite kosher about them, and yet we find they have a very popular name, usually indicating that under the surface, even though they may not be the most popular figures, they've done something right. Yael is such an individual. Well, so the rabbis are struggling. How are we going to explain Esther being married to Acheshvarosh? And by the way, as Johnny mentioned, Rabbi Lieberman mentioned, he is not, the image that we have of Acheshvarosh is very different from the picture, the portrait that Chazal paint about him. He was equally as evil, anti-Semitic, hater of Jews, as much as Haman. Indeed, how do we know this? Because when Haman tries to bribe Acheshvarosh and pay him to allow him to kill the Jews, what does Acheshvarosh do? He hands back the silver and says, why would you pay me to do something that I very much want to do myself? You're only helping me and fulfilling my own desires to be rid of the Jews, regardless of what happens at the party in the beginning. That's Acheshvarosh. He's not someone that we have this image of him, that he's a fool, that he's, you know, this almost like a court jester type of person. The Chazal say it's a very different situation. And this is who Esther is with. It accentuates the difficulty, the tragedy of it. Mordechai understands this. And so you have a kind of a little known, kind of an insert into the Megillah that many people skip over and don't realize, that there is a second beauty contest. Esther wins the first, and she will not reveal who she is. And ironically, Acheshvarosh, although he's no lover of Jews, like a lot of kings and rulers, they have Jewish advisors. And Mordechai, being brilliant, member of the Sanhedrin, knows 70 languages. That's how he hears the plot against Acheshvarosh's life. So Acheshvarosh comes to him and says, Mordechai, you know everything. How can I get Esther to tell me who she is? Now, imagine the irony here. This is Mordechai talking to him as if he doesn't know who Esther is, and says, well, the only way you might be able to get it out of her is if she becomes jealous. If you hold another beauty contest and it appears somebody else is going to be your queen, no woman likes to be outdone by another woman. Then you'll be in a position to say, do you want to become the queen? Tell me who you are. That doesn't work either. Of course, Mordechai's hidden agenda is maybe indeed someone else will be chosen and Esther will be deposed as the queen, and that will solve all the problems. And she won't have to be with him. There'll be a new, even though a harem consists of many women, but she, this one central and most important queen, she'll be free of it, but it doesn't work. But now we have to add something. This is the kicker that really changes everything. The Gemara tells us, Gemara in Megillah, on the telling us, explaining who Esther is, that her parents died, and it says Mordechai took her lo lebat, as a daughter, which is a euphemism as well. And the Gemara says, al tikra lebat, ella lebait. Says Rav Meir, she is not his niece, his cousin. Esther is Mordechai's wife. And the Gemara pretty much sticks to this, and nobody argues strenuously against it. And this is interesting because the original, according to the Chazal, they were only supposed to take unmarried women for this beauty contest. But there was something about Esther that caused them to say, we'll make an exception in her case, even though she was married and she was taken as well. So either the decree was not followed by the messengers or whatever the case may be, she was taken though she was a married woman. When Esther is taken by force and she has no choice, so this follows the principle that we have in Judaism in general, ones rachmana patre, that when you do something that you are forced to do, that you have no control over, that you don't want to do, the Torah understands Rahmana, God has Rahmanut. Rahman is another name for God or for the Torah, and you are excused. But when Esther willingly goes in to see the king, she now is actively committing adultery. Until now, she had no choice. The king took her, forced her. Certainly women had very little say back then, and there was nothing she could do about it. But now, when Mordechai says to her, you are to go and petition the king to ask to see him, this is a completely different story. And when you come to the king's, to the foyer of the king, and you request to see the king, you're not going to simply have tea and crumpets with him. That implies you are going to have sexual relations. The king, especially someone who is as voraciously sexual as Acheshvarosh, it's without any doubt that you will then be engaging in intimate relationships, and now it will be at your bidding. As a sidelight, Gemara tells to indicate who Acheshvarosh was, this plot by Bigtan and Teresh to kill the king. Why did they want to kill him? So the Gemara says, very interestingly enough, they were two guards who had the night shift, and they had to guard Acheshvarosh's palace and his bedroom during the night. And because he was such a massive lover, the evenings were filled with screams that these two guards, who figured we've got the easy rotation, we'll be here to the middle of the night, nobody's up, we'll just go to sleep on the job. They were unable to sleep. The sounds and the noise and the screaming that came out of Acheshvarosh's bedroom kept them awake all night, and they said, we've got to get rid of this guy or we'll never get any sleep. So that's who we're dealing with. And that's why Esther challenges Mordechai. And at first it looks like she's trying to evade responsibility. But she's saying to him, Mordechai, my husband, it's one thing when I had no choice, but you're telling me now to go and see him willingly. And we know what that entails. And of course, when Mordechai insists, and he gives his famous speech, right? Umi yodea im le'eit kazot higat lemalchut. What is to say that this isn't the specific reason why you indeed won the beauty contest, why you were put here? This is your moment in the sun. This is your one chance to save the Jewish people. So what does she reply to him? In these very poignant three words, kasher avadati, avadati, which we say is one of the psukim we say in the Eicha tune, right? Kasher avadati, avadati. I had just as an aside, I had a chazan who had a very acute sense of humor. He would tell me that if he conducted a wedding where he didn't think the Chatan and Kala were meant for each other and that it would probably end poorly, he would sing for the Sheva Brachot. He would sing it in the Eicha tune. Misameach Chatan im hakala. Anyway, that's an aside. So here she says, Kasher avadati, as I was lost to my own family because my parents died, now I will be lost to you. I can never come back to you. The moment that I have relations by my own will with Acheshvarosh, you and I can never be with each other again, because that is adultery. So how did Mordechai allow this? We know that he wished it wouldn't have happened. Nevertheless, there comes a point where he is facing a reality that she is going to violate a mitzvah d'oraita that is yarog val yavor, that she has to die rather than go through with it. Nevertheless, he tells her that she has to do it. And Chazal struggle with this greatly. And one of the answers that they say is Mordechai was not like you and I. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. The members of the Sanhedrin, although they were not Nevi'im, they had Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, and they were in touch with, let us call it, for lack of a better term, with the will of God, and they could violate a mitzvah for a higher cause. And it's an admittedly radical and dangerous act. And we see this reference to this in one of the Tehillim, which you may be familiar with. It's in Kuf Yotet. And there the pasuk says, Eit lasot lashem heferu torotecha. Basically, and it's explained Chazal, al manat lishmor et kiyum haTorah v'amitzvot, mutar v'tzarich lif'ol afilu al yedei ma'aseh asur. For the sake of maintaining or continuity of Torah and mitzvot, and you can add of the Jewish people, there are times when you can break the law. This is Eit Lasot, it's called. It's a extreme situation. Heferu Torotecha, you can indeed break the laws of the Torah for a higher cause. It's very dangerous. It's one of those things, as I said before, don't try it at home. It probably won't work for you. But certain individuals throughout Jewish history, this is exactly what they did. Just as a couple of examples, Abraham is going to kill Yitzchak at the Akedah, if you accept the fact that he was prepared to kill him. Why? It's murder. Did Yitzchak commit any crime? Did he deserve capital punishment? How could Abraham commit a murder in the name of God? But he was prepared to do so. Moshe Rabbeinu and Eliyahu Hanavi, both of them engage and violate the commandment, Al tanasu et Hashem Elokecha, do not test God. You're not allowed to dare God and say, God, if you do such and such, then if you come across with that, I will do such and such. You're not allowed to do that. So Moshe says, where is that case? Where he says, by Korach, I want to create some new and never seen before phenomena. Let the earth open up and swallow Korach. God, that's what I want you to do. Eliyahu does the same with the Nevi'ei Baal. And he says, I'm going to conduct this test. I'm going to take this wood. I'm going to soak it in water. And God, I want you to send fire down and ignite it. Torah says you're not allowed to do such a thing. Nevertheless, they did so. And there are other examples of this as well. Certain individuals can, in a sense, take the law into their own hands. And this perhaps is what allowed Mordechai, even though he knew, technically speaking, what Esther was going to do was absolutely forbidden. Nevertheless, he tells her, Esther, you have to do it anyway. Well, a kind of bottom line to this struggle. And we can only imagine what Esther is going through. You have to certainly be down the kafstut that she is a very brilliant person. Now you talked a little bit about some of the machinations and the political savvy that she had. She was actually a very, very creative and brilliant person. She certainly is understanding what's going on here. And we have to have a lot of sympathy for her. And the Gemara tries to kind of sum up this dilemma that Esther is facing. And that's why I say Esther, prisoner or princess. On the one hand, we may think of her in Bnei Brak and elsewhere as this gorgeous and absolutely delightful princess, but in effect, she was a prisoner of the situation, certainly not of her own choosing. So the Gemara, I think, expresses it best in asking the question that many people ask. If Esther wanted to plea and request a pardon for her people and convince Acheshvarosh to let Am Yisrael, let the Jewish community of Persia live, then why did she invite Haman to the party? She could have had Acheshvarosh come to the party. She gets him drunk. She gets him in a good mood. And then she finds at the right moment to spring this question and say, reveal who she is and ask for clemency for the Jewish people. Why ask Haman? And why do it twice? Why have two parties? One wasn't enough. Why did she have to have a second party? So the Gemara gives 10 answers to this question, indicating that it really is the key to understanding what's going on here. And I'm not going to go through all 10, but I'll just tell you 3 of them. One makes a lot of sense. Says Rav Yossi, Kadeshe Matsui La Bakol 8. She did it because this way, if she gets her way, and if she's able to prevail against Haman, then he's right there. He can't run away. And indeed, as we alluded to before, Haman was seeking to stage a coup against Acheshvarosh. I just should mention as an aside, Acheshvarosh was a commoner. He got the throne, and this is another idea behind the crown, because he was married to Vashti. Vashti was not a commoner. Vashti was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She had royal blood, but he did not. And therefore, he always had a bit of an inferiority complex and worried that somebody would come along. And as we know in England, other countries, you know, they have to trace your royal bloodline. He didn't have one. So Haman was aware of that. And Haman had royal blood. And therefore, he was quite willing to talk about the fact that he was descended from Agag, Melech Amalek. Agag was considered a king. So he was from royal blood. So there was always that possibility that he would stage a coup against Acheshvarosh. So having him there at the party, that prevented him from hearing about this, forming his own militia, and fighting against the throne. And so she invited him to be there at that critical moment when she springs the trap. He'll be caught and he'll be right there for the taking. Says Rav Nehemiah something very fascinating that I think is very apropos to our current crisis in Israel. Rav Nehemiah says, why did she invite Haman to the party? Kedei shelo yomru Yisrael, achot yesh lanu bebeit hamelech, v'yasichu da'atan min harachamim. Says Rav Nehemiah, she was worried that she knew that at a spiritual level, if she was going to be successful, she needed the spiritual power of the Jewish community, the entire community, to prevail upon Hashem to give her success when she goes in to see the king. But if she will go in by herself with the king, they'll say, this is a no-brainer. She's won 2 beauty contests. The king obviously loves her. He adores her. We're scot-free. She'll tell him that she's Jewish. He'll spare our people and nothing to worry about. Says Esther, I can't let that happen. I need the people to think that something may be going on here. Why is Haman coming to that party? Maybe she's going to cut a separate deal with him to save herself. And indeed, this is kind of what Mordechai almost implies when he says, if you think you and your family will escape, etc. So she says, I don't want the people being complacent and saying, let Esther handle it. I want them to think that something else could be going on. They better pray, and they better pray damn hard. And that's, of course, exactly what they do. They gather, right? Noset Kol Yehudim for 3 days. They fast, they daven, etc. Says Rav Nehemiah, that's why she invited Haman. But I think the clincher comes from Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says the reason why she invited Haman and why she did it twice is she had a plan. She knew that this situation cannot end well for me. I must do something about it. He says in very simple words, but powerful, Asbir lo panim kadesh yarog hu v'hi. She says, I will, for lack of a better term, I will make eyes. Remember that song? Gee, she's making eyes at me. Google eyes, they would sometimes call it. She will have Haman there, and she's invited him twice. So the king is already thinking himself, okay, the first time I understand, you got the king, you got the prime minister, but why have him a second time? Is something going on there? She says, I will maybe play footsies with him, make eyes with him, and you know what will happen? The king will kill him because you never fool around with the queen. That's also Yarog Valyavor, the queen is sacrosanct. Acheshvarosh will kill him, saving the Jewish people, and then he will kill me. And that way I will be finally out of this predicament. And that's my only possibility, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. That's why she did it, in the hopes that all the loose ends would be tied up. The Jews would be saved, and she would be spared violating this cardinal principle to be with this Jew-hating anti-Semite, non-Jew, something that she could not live with either. Of course, we know what happened. It was not to be. God had other plans, because the ultimate footnote and outcome and the whole reason why Purim is even a holiday, since the Gemara says you can never have a holiday based in outside of Israel after we've entered Israel, we have it in Pesach, of course, but after we enter Israel, no event that happens outside of Israel is of eternal importance, but Purim is the exception, because what will happen? Acheshvarosh and Esther will continue. They will have a child. The child is Darius II. He will renew the order of Cyrus that had been revoked by Vashti to allow the Jewish people to rebuild the second Beit HaMikdash, thus connecting this story of Purim with Israel. That's a strong enough connection. Chazal said, this is the exception. We can allow this to be a permanent holiday and perennially told story of the Jewish people. So he had to stay married to him, but it certainly was nothing that she wanted to do. So I would sum up and say that she was indeed one of these phenomenal heroines of the Jewish people. The litmus test of a hero, of a tzaddik, is one basic midah, mesirat nefesh. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for the common good? And this is what ties together the true heroes of Am Yisrael. Yitzchak is one. He's willing to go. He's no youngster. He's in his late 30s when he's at the Akedah, but he's willing to go under the knife. Moshe says, blot me out from your book if you do anything to hurt the Jewish people. Yosef HaTzadik, he sacrifices himself for the Jewish people and sets them up in Goshen. He's the first of the brothers to die, even though he's one of the youngest. Rivka, he does what she needs to do to win the birthright for Yaakov, and then she dies alone. That's why the name Rivka means Rivaka, one who is alone. And Rachel gives away her beloved Yaakov to sister Leah with tremendous act of Mesiras Nefesh. And this is true of Esther, that she sacrifices herself for her people. And I think it's so appropriate that tonight that we are dedicating our talks to Itai Chen, Hashem Yikom Damo, and all of our Chayalim HaKadoshim. They demonstrate the same elevated and holy category that few people can attain. We should reach the time when we no longer have to be Moser Nefesh in the extreme, and that Hashem will recognize everything that we've gone through, and He will, as the story of Purim ends, He will help us to rebuild not the second, but the third Beit HaMikdash b'mehera v'yameinu.
I do want to also mention later that there are cards here for the Chayalim. You can take one later on and put it in your seat.